Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to My Little Pony Lore. I admit it's a slight sidestep from what I'm usually doing, but for some reason, the time just seemed right, you know? Oh god, no, not that. No, not that, My Little Pony. The time isn't that right. God, no. Those things, they frighten me. Just the dead, soulless eyes. Oh, no. We are not talking about the 1980s original. We are talking about the recent and ridiculously popular iteration from the 2000s. For you see, My Little Pony actually has a fair old depth of lore to it. It was originally created in 1981 by Bonnie Zaccherli, something along those lines, as a toy line for Hasbro. That sounds a bit cynical with our current day sensibilities, but that was just how stuff was made back in the day. Somebody would have an idea for a cool toy like giant robots that turn into trucks, and then an entire animated series would be created around it as part of a marketing campaign, often even including books or comics or anything else that the kids were into. And considering we are still getting movies about aforementioned giant robots, I'd say it was a pretty successful marketing scheme. But, of course, as with all things, there were failures, there were mediocrity, and there were successes, but not quite successful enoughs. And the original My Little Pony joined the ranks of the latter, as it was certainly not unpopular by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't quite the supernova smash hit that was required to compete in the exceptionally competitive toy market of the late 80s and early 90s. But then, in the 2000s, Hasbro was looking over their enormous stock of hostage IPs kept on cold storage, of course, and they spotted the soulless, dead-eyed pony things and thought to themselves, well, this'll sell like hotcakes again, won't it? And I have a sneaking suspicion that maybe it wouldn't, were it not for the fact that they tapped animator Lauren Faust to head the revitalization of the My Little Pony project. Lauren was at the time most well known for her work on the Powerpuff Girls. And anyone who used to watch that show as a kid can no doubt predict that the dead-eyed little soulless ponies were about to be introduced to a whole other brand of entertainment. Oh god. The Powerpuff Girls. Ooh, that was a television show and a half, no doubt, and whilst Lauren did, tone down the ultra-violence for the Ponyverse, the My Little Pony setting was about to get a very different brand of storytelling, with a lot more focus on characters and occasionally some relatively serious topics. And the rest, as they say, is history, as the franchise absolutely exploded to a ludicrous degree, earning some $1 billion in 2014 and 15. The television series, Friendship is Magic, would continue on for 221 episodes, and would become a success, well, not just with the target audience of young girls, but also a very large portion of adult men. Which caught everyone by surprise. But, sometimes you catch strange fish with the weirdest of bait. Anywho's, we've dilly-dallied around long enough, but I figured as most of you are probably not necessarily well-versed in this setting, an introduction was in order. But without further ado, let's get to today's topic, the monster of the setting, the Changelings. Well, one of the monsters anyways. For such an outwardly fluffy and cutish setting, it has a surprising number of malevolent entities, including communists. My god, communist ponies. Now, luckily, the setting does consider communists to be, well, evil, so that's good, but still, there are communists. Anywho, changelings. These little ponies, well, actually not ponies. These little insects, well, actually not insects either. These little plants, well, nuts specifically. It's a long story, okay? The changelings were created when a squirrel threw a particularly disgusting nut into a particularly disgusting pool, which grew into a particularly disgusting tree. Flesh-eating tree, incidentally. Which swiftly set about devouring the local ecosystem, until being happened upon by Starswirl the Bearded, the Merlin of the universe, essentially, who saw the particularly disgusting tree and the particularly disgusting water and thought to himself, well, this looks negative. And so it was, but unfortunately for literally every single living being on the planet, Starswirl the Bearded, in his infinite retardation, elected to solve the problem by nailing a warning note to the trunk of the tree. This seems an optimistic solution at the best of times, but this was not the best of times, and instead of warding off some pony... kill me. It only succeeded in cracking the tree trunk open, unleashing Chrysalis on the world. Brilliant. And she was not alone either, as apparently an entire army of changelings had been nesting inside the tree trunk. Undoubtedly, Chrysalis and her newfound cohorts would have engaged in a little bit of hanky-panky to increase their numbers, because the next time she appeared, she was at the head of a major army. You see, Chrysalis was actually a rather competent war leader, as demonstrated by several successful campaigns in the pony world. One of the more noteworthy ones was the invasion of Timbuktu, where she defeated the reigning king of the Pegasi of the city, King Orion. This was still in the early days of the Changelings' campaigns across the world, and so their military strategy was still semi-formed. They initiated a blitzkrieg-style assault upon the city, descending from the heavens and using shock and surprise to their advantage to overcome much of the city's guards and outer defenses, descending upon the innocent populace to devour their love. For you see, changelings live off eating other people's love. Of course they do. Why not? However, King Orion was not the king of the Pegasi of the city for no reason, and put up a fierce resistance until Chrysalis pulled off a brilliant ploy. Again, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that she was quite an accomplished war leader. As in the midst of the heat and fury of combat, seeing her changelings being rapidly defeated by the far physically superior Pegasi, she attacked one of the king's guard, beat him down, and then used her magic to become him, ordering the retreat of the Pegasi to the palace, where she followed them in, locked the door, and devoured their love, giving her all the power she would ever need to defeat King Orion personally in single combat and steal his power from him as well. And to add insult to injury, she also stole his cherished crown and turned it into a new, twisted, warped reflection of her newfound royal status. And this was to be far from Queen Chrysalis's only or last conquest. She would go on to commit several other atrocities and carry out several other successful campaigns, including a lengthy siege on the city of Trot. Queen Chrysalis had initially attempted to infiltrate the city and seduce its emperor, Incitatus, who had a rather inflated sense of self-worth. But despite, or perhaps because of this, he was able to see through Queen Chrysalis's ruse and expel her and her changelings from the city by activating its magical shield, which would render the city impervious to any further attempts upon it by the Queen or her hordes. Seeing no military solution, the Queen instead again elected to employ a bit of subterfuge and trickery, as she had constructed a huge wooden horse in the Emperor's image. The guards attempted to warn the Emperor that there was something mildly sus about this gift that suddenly showed up at their doorway, literally the day after they had defeated Queen Chrysalis and her Changeling Horde. But the Emperor pointed out that the wooden horse had a remarkably resplendent chin, and thus could not possibly bear him any ill will. A bold theory, but one that proved fatally flawed, as it turns out, when Queen Chrysalis and her Changeling Hordes burst forth from inside the statue. Most unexpected, and immediately began burning, pillaging, and devouring the love of the local population. The Emperor himself was also nommed and taken out of commission, but fortunately for the good people of Trot, one of the gate guards of the city had some doubts as to his Emperor's theses, and so had requested reinforcements before allowing the great wooden horse into the city from Princess Celestia and her royal guard, who turned up just in time to, well, see the city burning, so a bit earlier would probably have been preferable. But she was just in time to blast poor, innocent Queen Chrysalis into smithereens with her magical horn laser beam thing. This is a weapon the ponies use because organized warfare is a thing in the Ponyverse. Now, yes, by and large it exists in the form of ponies slap fighting each other, or if you want to get a little bit more advanced and technical, one pony pumping another pony's ass. I know what that sounds like, but it's not. I have the video evidence to prove that that is what happens, and that it is not what you think it is, okay? This is still a family-friendly episode, alright? But, though warfare does exist, and occasionally on a pretty gosh darn grandiose scale as well, requiring the full mobilization of the entirety of ponydom, to wage war on an industrial level, casualties are apparently rather rare and light, as none of the sides appear to really go out of their way to kill one another. Now, in the case of the Changelings, there is a bit more of a practical reason for this. The Changelings are not really interested in killing the ponies, because the ponies are their food. But not food as in steaks and sirloins, but in the love that they can produce. And so murdering them would, well, kind of be annihilating their very own food source. An unwise move in the long term. And of course, the good ponies under the command of Princess Celestia are far more merciful again, electing to not simply kill Queen Chrysalis and her misformed monster things, but instead imprison them inside of a volcano. I wonder if a good old-fashioned laser blast to the back of the skull mightn't have been more merciful, honestly, but alright. For hundreds of years, the Changelings and their queen languished inside of the volcano, which they simply described as hot. I imagine they were also starving to death every second of those hundreds of years, seeing as, well, they require love for sustenance, and yet they apparently don't die if bereft of it either for extremely long periods of time, leading me to assume that they were just simply really goddamn hungry for 200-odd years. Again, I'm thinking that laser ball to the back of the brain stem might actually have been a preferable punishment. But one day, speaking of hunger incidentally, a dragon arrived, tore the top off the volcano, and threatened to eat all of the changelings inside. Now, one would guess that even if Princess Celestia did not actively choose to kill the changelings, they can still die, and being chewed alive by a dragon and then slowly dissolved by its stomach acids would probably get the job done, so this was a bit of a pinch for the changelings. But, again, their queen rescued them. She battered her eyelashes just right with a pinch of magic against the dragon, feeding upon his ego and tricking him into showing off his glorious physique, first by demonstrating his ability to breathe fire, which all the changelings agreed was most impressive indeed, but even more impressive was the incredible wingspan of a dragon. What an unfathomably majestic sight that must be to see! What if the dragon could show off his incredible wings to them? And thoroughly flattered, he did so. After which, Queen Chrysalis grabbed the closest member of her royal guard and threw him through the dragon's wing. An improvised method of offense, to be sure, but an effective one. Taking the chance, the changelings exited the volcano Tutsuit, and now bereft of his ability to fly, the mighty proud dragon fell into the volcano to be submerged in its fiery depths. And live? Die? The story doesn't tell, but I imagine dragons would at least be decently resistant to lava. Thus, having made their escape, the changelings were free to roam the world yet again. But Queen Chrysalis had gained herself a new arch-enemy in Princess Celestia. The queen had also discovered that Equestria, the princess's kingdom, queendom? Princessdom? Whatever, was also probably the single most love-filled place in all the world. A boundless source of precious love and nourishment for the queen and her subjects. As such, resolved to never see them starve again, she set her sights on conquering Equestria. But how to do it? See, here's the problem. The changelings are decently powerful in numbers, but they are certainly not the teeming innumerable hordes of other more insectoid species. In large part because, well, they've never really had a home. They've never really had a permanent source of love that they can farm and grow and feed on infinitely. They've been raiders, barbarians, and pillagers, and thus their numbers have been severely limited. Furthermore, whilst they are decently physically powerful, they are no match for the Pegasi, for example. Nor do they have the magical prowess of the unicorns. Queen Chrysalis herself is quite powerful, after having devoured the love of several high-ranking officials from the many nations that they have ravaged so far, but even she is no match for the princesses of Equestria, and even if she was, she is just one bug pony, leading only one bug horde. In an organized military incursion against the enormous nation of Equestria, she and her changelings would stand very little chance indeed. So once more, they will need to leverage their foremost ability, their changeling powers. Any changeling can take on the form of any other pony, and they can mimic them to near perfection, with Queen Chrysalis herself being the foremost expert of them all. Now, their personalities tend to seep on through, which makes them a bit less than subtle at times, but nevertheless, in a relatively trusting society like that of Equestria, a changeling can be rather difficult to uncover. Especially as most ponies tend to take whatever they're told at face value without really asking too many questions. A naive weakness that the Queen has used on multiple occasions to stir up some shit in Equestria. But, so if a military conquest was out of the question, what was left then? Well, a coup and an assassination plot, perhaps. A plan to decapitate the horse's head immediately, and then rule over the masses, now leaderless and scattered. Queen Chrysalis, in order to do this, took the form of Princess Cadence, who was set to be wed to the captain of the Equestrian Guard, Shining Armor, the only individual in Equestria that could generate the force field protecting Canterlot, the capital castle, from the changelings' mass assault. So long as the castle could hold out for even a brief period of time, the rest of Equestria's army could quickly gather and overwhelm the changelings. But if the castle and its royal inhabitants could be seized quickly, then it did not matter if the army could mobilize, as the heads of state would all be held hostage within the castle. The Queen's ruse is near perfect, fooling everyone except for Twilight Sparkle, which is one hell of a name, I'll say that much, who realizes something is very wrong with Princess Cadence, who used to be her foal sitter. Recognizing that something was very wrong with her old friend, she faces off against the imposter, forcing Queen Chrysalis to act before she was ready, banishing Twilight Sparkle to great caves beneath Canterlot, where she has also imprisoned the real princess. The two make their escape as there wasn't a whole lot of guards on hand. Presumably, the Queen had elected to keep all of her military forces outside the castle, awaiting her order to strike, so as to not risk any discovery too early, only bringing with her 3 changelings in her infiltration force, so as to minimize the risk of exposure. A wise move, but one that turns out to have been perhaps a little bit overcautious, as it allows Twilight Sparkle and Princess Cadence to arrive in the middle of the ceremony to wed the Queen to Shining Armor, interrupt it, and reveal the Queen's ploy before the entirety of the court of Canterlot. Now revealed for the evil impostor that she is, the Queen is immediately set upon by Princess Celestia, who herself is an alicorn, the most magically powerful of all of pony kind. She had already defeated Queen Chrysalis once during the Siege of Trot, and was undoubtedly confident that she could do so again, but this time the battlefield was somewhat different. Then Queen Chrysalis was just barely starting to feed. Her initial infiltration effort had been discovered after all, and her horde had only recently broken open the city. She was at her relative weakest, whereas now she had already spent months feeding off of Shining Armor's love for Princess Cadence. And so, when Celestia made the fatal mistake of trying to match her power directly against that of Chrysalis, she came up short and was swiftly defeated, seemingly sealing all of Equestria's fate once and for all. For if their premier protector could be beaten so easily, surely no other pony could possibly hope to stand against the Queen. But, well, that was not taking into account the actions of Twilight Sparkle, who would eventually rise to be the Queen of Equestria as well, after Celestia herself retired much later on in the years. Twilight Sparkle and her friends attempt to make their ways to the elements, a super weapon, sort of, which might have the power to defeat Queen Chrysalis, but is surrounded by the changelings, who have now been given the orders to begin the storm of Canterlot. With Shining Armor and his force field weakened, they swiftly break through it and begin overwhelming the defenders within Canterlot, who are woefully unprepared for an attack on this scale. The Queen seems to have won everything, but in one last desperate maneuver, Twilight Sparkle frees the real Princess Cadence, who rushes to her knight in Shining Armor's side and shakes him loose of Queen Chrysalis's spell. The power of love is then unleashed, lashing out and defeating the Queen and her changeling hordes by pushing them all out of Canterlot in one enormous force field bubble and sending them scattering far, far away to land in a country that would eventually become the changelings' new homeland. where Queen Chrysalis was planning to raise her forces, to build enormous hives and construct ever vaster numbers of changelings, since Equestria would now be on high guard against any further infiltration attempts. The subterfuge was unlikely to be successful again, or if it was, it would have to be paired with a far greater military might than she had possessed during the failed coup in Canterlot. The machine of war began to grow in the north. But so too did the seeds of revolution as well, as some of the changelings, one in particular, Thorax, well, he began to think of a different way. That perhaps ponies and changelings could coexist, and eventually he would become King Thorax and lead a harmonious rebellion against the Queen. But that is a story for another day. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.